Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniatures. It's Friday, which means more obscurities in literatures, and unfortunately today is a bit of a downer, having just found out that a artistic great and one of the artists that I had always looked up to and admired just for the sheer amount of stuff they did and just, they had a major impact on my childhood. A lot of work really impressed me growing up, and it's always been there at the forefront in my mind, and that is Richard Corben. So he unfortunately did pass away yesterday at the age of 80, but he did leave behind quite the legacy in terms of published works. And hopefully, with his passing, might as well take that opportunity to celebrate some of his best stuff. Unfortunately, some of his works like Den and what's the other one? The Odyssey and some of the other early heavy metal stuff. Arabian Nights. It's been out of print for some time, but I'd like to think that maybe we might see some of that get republished in English in the near future again. But this book right here from Dark Horse is part of their creepy line of reprints, and they did another one on Bernie Wrightson, which was another big influence on my own poor artistic skills. But Corbin was just in another world. His airbrush work and what he was doing with color, it was just mind-blowing at the time. I know as a kid growing up, the covers he did for the old Lone Wolf and Cub books by Joe Deaver had a huge impact on me. And when I put two and two together, who did that, and watching the old heavy metal movie with the whole John Candy Den segment in it, and actually finding those old copies of heavy metal with those early Den stories was kind of a big mind opener, and even getting a hold of some of his early underground stuff was even more crazy. I know my brother still got some of that somewhere. We'll see if he can find it. But anyway, this is probably his most accessible and most copious of stories all in one place, and that is the Creepy Presents Richard Corben book. This tagline is pretty succinct. Definitive collection of the artist's works from Creepy and Eerie, which were two of the flagship titles from Warren Publishing in the 60s and 70s, and I guess technically into the 80s, but for the most part, it was those 2 decades. And really, he was pushing the lines in terms of what people were doing with sequential art at the time. He did have a bit of a background in art. He was an animator. If you really want to see something interesting, he did basically his own handmade animated version of an early prototype of the Den story, which is out there on YouTube. I've had a chance to see, which is kind of neat, knowing where the story goes and knowing what happens with both the characters and the concept later on was kind of cool. So you can see there is quite a bit of content, over 300 something pages of stories. Some are good, some are bad, but that's pretty much what you get with a artist that spends nearly a decade working on these stories across all the various publications, and they did reprints of his stuff too. A lot of Bruce Jones collaborations in here, a lot of Jan Strnad collaborations. I can never say that name, but there's some really good stuff in here, things that I was familiar with as well. Now, I've gotten to see some of his early stuff, and they have a really nice introduction here by his colorist, whose name I don't want to mess up. They have a very copious Jose Villarrubia. Yeah. They have a very copious footnote section here, as well as some recommended further reading. So if you do want to take a look at that yourself, good luck finding some of these. They're not easy to find. I believe we've got the Richard Corben art book it mentions here. If I can find that at my parents' house, I'm going to bring that back over here for a future obscurity in literature. So Corben to me was always most famous and most impressive when he was doing his airbrush work. It was something that you didn't really see a whole lot often with comics, but it's not like his line work and his pencil work and ink wasn't impressive in its own right. The other interesting thing about this book is his stories run the gamut of genres. You've got psychological thrillers, you've got a lot of modern horror, you got the zombie stories, you've got high fantasy, you've got sci-fi, you've got ancient stories. It's just all over the place, which I always like and think is pretty cool. And it shows that, they aren't just a one-trick pony. Now, there are quite a few of his Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, which is something that he's continued with all throughout his life. I know Dark Horse published quite a few. I've read quite a few. One of the books I was hoping to find, and I don't know where I put it, was my copy of House on the Borderlands that he did, but I don't know where it is, unfortunately. So the book is an interesting mix of both black and white and color stories. Now, as you get later into it, it is mostly color. I always like these full page, full art ones, and to me this is like almost at his level of heavy metal stuff. And if you aren't familiar, I mean, Corbin did have, wasn't it the very first story in the original first issue of Heavy Metal? Not Metal Hurlant, but Heavy Metal. I'm pretty sure. Sometimes his people could look a little samey, but man, definitely had a sense of the fantastic. Again, the colors to me were always one of the neatest parts of his work. But it's not like he wasn't afraid to play around and experiment with what he was doing on the page. So if you're interested in finding something different, I mean, there's probably something for everybody in this, especially if you're interested. I love his Uncle Creepy. Here's his Raven. Again, his use of colors, quite impressive. Jumping further into the book, I'm only on like page 150, and like I said, he put in nearly a decade of work for Warren Publishing. You've just got all sorts of stuff in here. A lot of Christmas stories, funny enough. Also, a lot of comedy. There is quite a bit of almost EC comic black humor horror going on here. Do you enjoy that kind of thing? I've seen that illustration before. There's also loved his dinosaur pictures and his voluptuous, oversized, chested women in whatever format. Had quite an effect on younger me. Again, I'm rolling through this, and we're still, The Child was one of his famous ones. I'm not going to spoil it. We're going to try to zoom on past that. We'll let you guys read that on your own. Here's our one with the dinosaurs. With the conveniently obscured nudity. Wouldn't want to upset mom and dad. Some of this stuff's like almost proto-den too, in terms of where the stories go. There are quite a few serialized stories in here as well. A lot of the Bruce Jones stuff. Always with the monsters. And then in the very back of the book, we start to get into just his covers that he did, which were usually pretty impressive in their own right. Again, his sense of anatomy was sometimes questionable, but it was always impressive. Loved his color stuff. That one I can remember seeing. So yeah, a shame. He will be sadly missed, but at the very least, he left quite an impressive body of work behind him. Gone, but not forgotten, for sure. So yeah, fun stuff here. I'll put a link down below if you're curious. If you're into old retro books, these are always interesting to take a look at. But yeah, I think of the creepy and eerie archives, the ones to grab, this one and the Bernie Wrightson books. And I want to say there might have been a Steve Ditko one, but that might just be my imagination. I could be wrong. Anyways, this has been Obscurities in Miniature with High Lord Tamberlane. Saying thanks for watching. And we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.